Right, so we're going to move on to the next bit, which is the panel discussion. And really what we're going to do is take that whole theme of standards and what they're good for. The next step, we've got a very esteemed panel of colleagues and friends I've known for many, many years with great experience of some of these standards and implementing them, and some of the new ones that have come out in the last 2 or 3 years. And some of these people are working on standards that are yet to become standards with the BSI and so on. So I'm going to introduce just by name, and we're going to go from this side to that side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and basically state 3 things in terms of standards and the presentation or anything else related. And what I'll do is I'll come back to each of them and ask them a question just to get started, and then we'll take it and open it out from there. So we'll start on this end with Paul. So if you could introduce yourself and 3 points that you want to make, you've got a couple of minutes to do so, so let's take it from there.
Okay, thanks, Sarb. So my name is Paul Dorey. My history has been as a CISO in a number of organisations, including Barclays and BP, so I'm very fortunate in that. My current interest is very much around supply chain. So I'm part of an industry group that NCSC has set up for supply chain cybersecurity. I cheekily produced a slide, so if you don't mind, because I thought I'd just share. It's when Sarb asked me the question, I suddenly realised that Paul Dorey, the standards I wish for and the ones he mentioned are sort of partially my fault. And so what happened in the world of IT systems and applications back in the early 1990s was that companies like Barclays recognized that we needed to specify the security requirements to the supply chain, to our suppliers. And what we gave them was our internal standards, and the suppliers said, this is hopeless, I'm getting them from everybody. So it was decided to create a standard called BS 7799. So there were Barclays team members who were part of the creation of that, and it then turned into 27,000. Then when I was at BP in the early 2000s, we discovered that BP had more than IT systems. I know it was fairly obvious, but it took us a while. The cybersecurity guys suddenly discovered we had things called OT, industrial control systems. And we then saw that the current IT standard set didn't really work very well. And so we started to work along with others in the industry on something called ISA 99, which eventually turned into 62443, which is the OT cybersecurity standard. And so what we did, we changed the context of what we were doing, and we discovered the standard we had didn't fit the context. So my first message is you've got to have standards that fit your context now to be useful to you. The numbers up there were the illustration I wanted to sort of bring out there. And so if you go to the ISO website that talks about 27,000, they say you may have heard of 27,001, you may have heard of 27,002, but there are more than a dozen of them, it says on the ISO website. No ISO, there are 37 that I could come up with. That's a lot more than a dozen. And if you count the subsidiary standard, there are 61. Okay, and if you were to buy them, you'd spend £9,000. It would, by my calculation. I know, guys, there are discounts and all the rest of it. So I then looked at the ISA 62443, and the equivalent numbers there are 9 main standards and 13. That would expand to 13, including the subsidiary standards, and that's only 1,500, so it's an absolute bargain in terms of. But it's a barrier. We found that people are not able to even spend money on buy one standard, and I'm doing work for the NCSC, and some of the people participating can't even read the standards we're talking about because they can't afford to buy them. So complexity, too many standards, and cost is a barrier. I'm wondering if there's an escape from the standards that we're dealing with now. So what's our current context? I don't think it's so much about the IT systems and the OT systems. I spend my time talking about cloud services and IoT and things that are done by third parties, not by the organizations I'm working with. They buy it. They don't DIY it anymore. And so we're moving to a supply chain assurance standards being the standards that are becoming the relevant ones. And you still need a standard. You need a standard. So my second point is you need a standard to communicate. If you haven't got a standard, it's very hard to talk to a third party that you're interacting with. So I think that's absolutely key. And if you can't do assurance, what do you do? And there are things like attestation. So my message really are, you need standards in order to communicate. You need them to have context that's relevant to you now, but let's not overcomplicate them, and they can't cost too much. Thank you, Sarb. Thanks for tolerating my slide.
Thank you. Nigel.
Yeah, thank you. Well, good afternoon, and thanks for the invite, Sarb. So my name is Nigel Stanley. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity at a company called Jenkins. Jenkins is a global technical solutions company that designs, builds, and operates all sorts of large, critical national infrastructure. And my job is to make sure that the operational technology that we deploy is safe and secure, which you can imagine is quite a big job. To give you an idea of one of the particular challenges I now have is that you might be aware of some very large new cities being built in the Middle East. These are brand new cities in the middle of a desert, one of which is planned to be 170 kilometers long and 500 meters high. My job, should I choose to accept it, is to look at the operational technology that's going to be operating across that smart city and to ensure it's as secure as can be. So that's a huge task. Interestingly, as part of the project, there's going to be a high-speed railway line that runs from one end to the other. So rail cybersecurity is one of the other things that I get involved with. So I do sit on, relevant to this conversation, I sit on a BSI committee, and we've created a new technical standard called TS 50701, which is a technical standard for rail cybersecurity with a massive look at operational technology. It is quite derivative from IEC 62443, but that's really quite a good thing because it basically creates a semantically aware, the vernacular that the industry understands by taking 62443 into the rail domain. So I think that's a good example of an applied standard with relevance there. I think a couple of other comments. Absolutely get the point that Paul says about the cost of these standards. Even as a committee member, I get sent a copy, but that's it. So my organisation has to buy copies and what have you. So these things are very expensive. I think the standards are a very useful guide rail. In all my years of doing cyber work, standards are kind of interesting and useful. But in the fast-moving world of cyber, how on earth can the standards keep up? We started work on this rail cybersecurity standard a couple of years ago, and it's going to take a good few years before it's accepted by ILEC and IEC as an international standard. And who knows where we're going to be in a couple of years' time. So yeah, it's a real challenge. But thanks again, Sarb.
Alan.
I'm not sure about the esteemed bit that you started with, but I've certainly been in this space for a good while. And I remember coming into what we now call cyber in 2002 and meeting Paul for the first time, who I think you were a member of the Jericho Forum at that point, which for those of you who don't know it is about the idea of perimeterless security, which arguably we now call zero trust. It's not quite the same, but almost. And that passage of development of standards over the years that Nigel was just pointing to, I've been on both sides of that equation. So I'm an advisor these days, but I still consider myself a security practitioner. 17 years on the operations side in the Air Force, from physical security into cyber. I was in the stand-up team for the MOD's Computer Emergency Response Team in 2002 and found myself 2 weeks into that role when I'm still trying to really work out what it's all about, representing the MOD at the Cabinet Office to discuss a problem vulnerability in the ASN1 protocol, which was my first touch into standards and what it all means. Which leads me into my favorite question, which is always, so what? What does this mean to the business? Because if we can't do that translation from those standards, you haven't got a hope of getting the investment, whether you're on the corporate side or the vendor side. And that's kind of what I wrestled with, because I've been both sides of that equation. I've been a corporate security officer twice for a system integrator in the UK. I've been a CISO for a FTSE 100 engineering services firm that was the wrong side of a breach. I've been an associate partner consultant at IBM, so I'll wear my IBM colours. And I'm currently an independent trying to help small and medium businesses ask even the right questions and then hopefully help them understand the answers they get, because the devil is always in the detail. And that, I think, is my problem with standards. A, there's a lot of them, but even I'm rolling my eyes at 128 controls across 5 domains, or 130 plus controls in the 27002. And by the way, which year are we talking about? Is it 2013 or 2018 or 2022? And you're always looking backwards, because I've been an auditor as well as manage the auditor. And if you understand the semantics in that, you'll know where I'm coming from, because the auditor knows the questions to ask against the standard that they're auditing against. And if I'm managing the how we're going to respond to that, always stick to the truth, but never necessarily tell the whole truth. And there is a difference. But I probably better shut up there before I can incriminate myself. But that's where the standards piece works for me in terms of guardrails. But for me these days, it's about understanding the intent, which is a little bit more than just understanding the black and white in front of me.
That's great. Thanks very much, each of you. What I would like to do is ask you a question, and I want to bring in a couple of things that have been mentioned. First of all, earlier on today, I was presenting on a document which was the IOTSF's facilities document for facilities managers. And one of the things about the facility managers and the document and why the guidance is important is because facilities management, network security people, miles apart. And we've just looked at standards and we've seen evidence taken straight from the standards, the fact that you're in a position where you've got protect, very little detect and so on, and that's on IT. That's not even on OT, that's not even on IoT. When we come to facilities managers and we come to all the other environments, whatever environment it is, how can, cybersecurity standards in some respects, some of them are good in that they look at responsibilities and they do help identify who or certain roles that need to exist and certain things that need to happen, perhaps with certain roles. How can we move forward, and how do you think we should be dealing with this gap between those that are responsible for things where there are security issues and those that are responsible for security but not for the things that have the issues?
Can I go first? So look, it's got to be risk driven. There has to be a risk assessment, there has to be a management of risk, there has to be an acceptance of what we're going to do with the risk, and also a recognition that you can't eliminate risk. So that's a risk management discussion. But I think we've also got to recognize that, as an example, having been a CSO and a CISO, both of those tend to be on the corporate side, not on the product security side. Yeah, and I've been quite careful about that sometimes, because I've known there are issues on the product or services side that, because I don't actually have direct responsibility for, as in influence to change them, I don't want to be accountable for them either. And that's an organizational politics game that goes on. But I think the real issue is lack of convergence. The physical security teams probably works mostly in facility. They may or may not have recognition of industrial control systems and operational technology in the smart building space, because most of the time they don't. And that's very different to IT, which is really where the CISOs sit. You know, what do we mean by cyber? It is actually more than just securing the IT. And I think there's a responsibilities matrix that we need to be clear about that isn't clear at the moment.
So I think if I can add a bit more to that. So the number of times I talk to an asset owner or asset operator and ask the question, well, who's responsible for this risk? They just don't know. The FM people, the people that run the building management systems, or the OT, generally come from a mechanical or electrical engineering background. Your typical engineer, and I'm an engineer, I'm very proud to say I'm an engineer, they don't think that people are going to do bad things to their systems. You know, why would someone want to hack our building management system? Why would someone want to hack our HVAC? It's my job to open their eyes to that problem, and so they can understand that there is a risk there. I think the other issue is that there's been cases of too many IT people going into the OT environment, not understanding the culture, not understanding the language, and losing that political battle because of that. So being sensitive to that political culture is really important. And it's incumbent on us as cybersecurity engineers to make sure that we speak the right language.
It's a real Achilles heel that the place where the risk is best owned is often the place where the expertise doesn't lie to be able to understand it. And by having these stovepipes in our organisations, so let's take the first example between a supplier and the customer. If you're looking at the way the current work that's emerging around SBOM, etc., there's a lot of responsibility put on the customer on receiving this great big list of things and then being able to do something with it. And they may not, large corporations have the expertise potentially to do something with it, but smaller ones just go, thank you so much, that's a nice list of stuff, what the heck do I do with it? And what is it, ASN 1 anyway? And all that sort of stuff. A great conversation, that'll be later, won't it? But even within organisations, we've just heard it, isn't it? If cyber expertise lives in IT, like BP lived in IT, I told you we didn't know we had OT. And then OT busily going away, running important things like pipelines and refineries and it's a whole drilling operations, etc. And we had to cross that bound, and because the executive simply said, your expertise is going to be brought to bear in that area. And that's the thing we've got to challenge. We need our responsibilities, but responsibilities need to be mapped to capability as well. And we somehow need to bring that together.
So if we're going to learn from some of the things that we have experienced in IT, we went through mobile phones. Many organisations were saying we don't allow mobile phones. Well, that's interesting because everyone walks around with one. Yeah, we don't allow wireless networking. Well, that's interesting because we can see on here we've done a war drive. We can identify all these wireless networks. Oh, we don't allow social networks. Oh, we don't allow this or we don't allow that. We've gone through all that. What can we learn from that in terms of IoT and IoT devices coming in where at the moment still you're going to hear people saying, oh, we don't have that. Because yes, they don't have it officially, but they have it unofficially for one. Secondly, they may not have it, they may even have it officially. So for example, you're taking healthcare sector, they will buy whatever they need to buy, whatever the right thing is. It's bought for healthcare, it's not bought for the security. They don't know about the security. Only once it's there is anyone going to find out, if they're going to find out at all. So how do we deal with those things, learning from what we know about things that we've gone through?
So one of my biggest eye roll moments is when I ask an asset operator about their OT cybersecurity, and they say, we are secure because we are air-gapped. And I roll my eyes yet again. Really, there is no such thing as an air gap, because believe you me, a very bored operator at 3 o'clock in the morning will go into the control room with their smartphone and they'll be streaming in Netflix and what have you, because unfortunately, that's what people are like and that's what people do. So I think it's a real challenge. I think the other challenge is that the world of operational technology is moving away from sort of hokey-cokey, customized networks and very proprietary hardware into COTS, commercial off-the-shelf technology, IP-based networks, and that in itself is introducing a whole new bunch of risk, because people that sell kit into a plant want to do predictive maintenance. They want to actually monitor their asset to see whether their asset's about to go bang or whether there are issues with their asset. So organizations might think they operate in an air-gapped environment, but the chances are that the kit they run is not going to be air-gapped.
Yeah.
So I think to introduce the standards point, I do think that people need the humility to accept that a standard written by somebody who knows what they're doing is something they ought to pay some attention to. Now, they may need some help in interpreting it, but that's the way that we reduce the level of complexity. So you don't do it by the number of standards I described, but you do, but particularly a focused one to the sector, I think, very much to Nigel's point. That's when a bit of respect. We're having some house building work done at the moment, and when the engineer came up with the steel measurements, I didn't say to him, nah, I know better about this. I think we'll just put up a bit of wood and carry on. I'll accept the engineer's opinion, and he's helped by the fact there's someone else doing a bit of QA on him as well. So I think somehow we have to become more accepted. And what are we doing, perhaps, so that the standards and things that we produce are not being adopted with the level that we would like to see them being adopted?
I'm going to open the questions to the
Sarb,
audience.
can I just
before we move
grab
on?
one if I may?
Yeah, go on.
Because I'm going to swear 3 times, I think. I'm going to go safety, I'm going to go liability, and I'm going to go regulation. Because I'm not really a fan of regulation because it always struggles to keep up, but actually regulations will drive liability, particularly in a safety case space. And this is where I think OT actually has an advantage over IT, because safety is a known issue in the OT space. Not always adhered to, but it's definitely a known space. And what I've seen over the years is a gap between what we talk about and what we do. And what we do always lags what we talk about, whether that's in standards or in working groups. Why? Adoption takes time, frankly. But that means there's a degree of risk and there's a degree of exposure that somebody's either wittingly or unwittingly, and more often than not unwittingly, taken on. And I think we really need to tackle that. And the way to do that, unfortunately, is through regulation, because that requires people to do things rather than wish that they did the right thing. Because there's a mindset here that Nigel was pointing at. You know, I spent most of my time in security thinking about things that will go wrong, which is actually quite a pessimistic viewpoint, and that's not the majority viewpoint. And that's just something we have to recognize from a people aspect. So you see the politicians, for example, pushing for regulations in terms of social media without really understanding what the technical challenges are to do that, but they're in the right space from a requirements point of view, and therefore the onus has to be on the providers, whether they're product or service, to engineer their service or product in a better way. And that's through standards. And somewhere in there, there's an opportunity for insurance to promote good practice and penalize through higher premiums less good practice. And we've definitely seen that in the cybersecurity insurance market in the last 18 months, because the insurance market saw it as a new line of business in their specialities portfolio. I don't know whether any of you know the insurance space, and they've raked in the premiums over the years until ransomware really took off when they started to pay out the other side. Now, it's not a straight game, and the issue with that is they're actually paying for your costs associated with the breach. They might be paying costs to get you back to where you were, that recovery effort, but it doesn't include improvement to get you where you actually need to be, because if all you're doing is getting back to where you were, that means you're still vulnerable. So there are some angles here. So I'll go back to safety, liability, and regulation, unfortunately, are needed.